My sister-in-law answered the door wearing my grandmother's pearl earrings. Not similar ones. Not pearls she happened to own. Mine. The ones my grandmother pressed into my palm the week before she died. The ones I kept in the small velvet pouch in my nightstand drawer. The ones I had never once let leave that apartment. She stood in my doorway with her hand resting on the frame like she was welcoming me into her home, and those pearls sat at her ears like they had always belonged there. I had just flown back from a work trip to Seattle. 3 days. I had been gone 3 days. I said her name. I asked her what was going on. She gave me a smile. I had seen her practice on other people, that patient, slightly pitying smile she used when she thought she was smarter than whoever she was talking to, and she told me that she and my brother had decided this arrangement wasn't working anymore, that the apartment was too small for all 3 of us, and that they thought it would be best if I found somewhere else to stay while we figured things out as a family. I want you to understand something before I go any further. That apartment was mine. I bought it. I saved for 6 years, worked 60-hour weeks as a software engineer in Austin, skipped vacations, drove the same car for 9 years, and I bought a $1.9 million condominium on the 14th floor, with a view of the city that I had dreamed about since I was 22 years old, eating ramen in a studio the size of a walk-in closet. My name was on the deed. My name was the only name on the deed. I had no roommates, no co-signers, no partner. I bought it alone because I had built something alone, and I was proud of that in a way I had never been proud of anything. My brother had called me 4 months earlier, his voice doing that thing it does when he needs something soft around the edges, careful, almost childlike. He said he and his wife had hit a rough patch. He said his contracting business had dried up, that she had left her job to take care of their son, that they were 3 weeks from losing their lease. He said it would be temporary. 2 months, maybe 3, just until he landed a new contract. I had a spare room. I said yes. I said yes because he was my brother and because I believed him, and because I had spent my whole life being the one in this family who said yes when it counted. That was my first mistake, and I knew it standing in my own hallway looking at those pearls. But knowing a mistake doesn't undo it. I told her to step aside. I told her I was coming in. She said she wasn't sure that was a good idea right now, that my brother wasn't home, that it would be better if I came back later when we could all talk calmly. I asked her if she had lost her mind. I asked her if she understood whose name was on the mortgage, on the deed, on every piece of paper attached to that building. She tilted her head and said, very gently, that things had changed, and that I should talk to my brother. Then she closed the door. I stood in that hallway for about 30 seconds, and I want to be honest with you about what I felt in those 30 seconds, because I think it matters. I didn't feel rage. I felt something colder than that. I felt the specific, nauseating sensation of realizing that something had been planned, that this was not an impulse, not a fight that had spilled over, not a misunderstanding. She had known I was landing that afternoon. She had been waiting. Here is why I didn't call the police that night, because I know that's the question. I know that's what you're thinking. I thought about it standing there in that hallway. I pulled my phone out. I stared at the screen. And then I made a calculation that I'm not sure I would make again, but I'm going to explain it honestly. My brother and I had grown up in a house where conflict meant nuclear war. My mother operated on escalation. Every disagreement became a referendum on whether you loved the family, and the family always meant her. And choosing yourself always meant you were selfish and cold, and the reason everything was falling apart. I had spent 31 years being trained to pause before I reacted, to take the smaller loss now, to avoid the bigger explosion later. I had been so thoroughly conditioned to manage my brother's consequences, that when I stood in that hallway, my brain went, wait, get information first. Don't blow this up until you know what you're dealing with. So I went to a hotel. And I have thought about that decision every single day since. And I understand why it looks like weakness from the outside. And I am telling you it was not weakness. It was 31 years of survival training, misfiring in the worst possible moment. I called my brother from the hotel room. He didn't answer. I texted him. He replied 2 hours later, with a wall of words that I'm still not entirely sure he wrote himself. It read too smooth, too organized, too much like something his wife would have drafted that said they had been unhappy living there, that he felt like I had made them feel like guests in their own home, that his wife was stressed, and his son deserved stability, and that they had looked into their options and spoken to someone and believed they had a right to stay while they secured housing. They had spoken to someone. I read that sentence 4 times. I called a real estate attorney the next morning. I found her through a colleague who had used her in a dispute 2 years earlier, and I will tell you that the first thing she said to me after I explained the situation was, don't touch anything yet. Don't threaten them. Don't change utilities. Don't contact them in writing without running it through me first. And pull your full deed and title history today. Today, not tomorrow. I pulled it that afternoon. There was a document I didn't recognize. It was a power of attorney, notarized, dated 6 weeks earlier, 6 weeks before I came home to find my sister-in-law in my doorway. It listed my brother as my authorized agent, with the ability to act on my behalf in all matters related to the property. My signature was at the bottom. I had never signed that document. I had never seen that document. I had never been in the same room as whoever notarized it. I sat in the hotel business center, and I looked at my signature, at something shaped like my signature, and I felt the floor tilt under me. Not because I was afraid, because I understood, suddenly and completely, what had been happening for the past 4 months. They had not been staying with me while they got back on their feet. They had been gathering what they needed. They had been studying how I signed my name. My attorney looked at the document that evening and said 4 words. This is straight fraud. She told me what they were likely planning to use the power of attorney to attempt a deed transfer, or to at minimum create enough legal murkiness to drag out any eviction proceedings by claiming I had granted consent. She said the notarization was the weak point. Every notary is required to verify identity. Either the notary had failed catastrophically at their job, or they hadn't, and something worse had happened. I want to tell you about the moment I stopped being sad and started being strategic. It was not a dramatic moment. I was sitting on the hotel bed at 11 o'clock at night eating a granola bar I had bought from the vending machine in the lobby, and I picked up my phone and I started going back through my email. 3 years of email. Because if my brother had been building towards something, there would be a trail. People who plan things leave trails. They can't help it. They need to talk about what they're doing. They need to confirm details. They need to complain to someone about the person they're doing it to. They always leave trails. I found the first one in 40 minutes. It was an email my brother had sent to my mother 8 weeks after he moved in, and my mother had forwarded it to me by accident. She had meant to forward it to my aunt, I think, and she hit the wrong contact. She realized immediately, and sent a follow-up saying to ignore the last email, that she had sent it by mistake, and I had filed it away without reading it because at the time I trusted my family, and there was no reason to dig through my mother's forwarded messages. I read it that night in the hotel room. My brother had written to my mother about the apartment, about how much it was worth, about how my sister-in-law had done research and found that if I died without a will, or if there was any question about my mental fitness, or if he held power of attorney, the path to the property became significantly shorter. He wrote about how I was single, how I didn't have a partner who would fight for my interests, how I had always been, in his words, someone who backed down when pushed hard enough. He wrote, "She doesn't know how to fight for herself. She never has. She'll find a way to make it okay because that's what she does." I sent that email to my attorney at midnight. She called me at 7 the next morning and told me we were filing criminal fraud charges in addition to the civil case. Here is what I learned about people who do what my brother did. They believe, somewhere deep down, that the rules are for other people. Not in a dramatic way, not in a movie villain way, in a quiet, practical way. They look at a system, a legal system, a financial system, a family system, and they see it as something to be navigated rather than followed. My brother had never been arrested, never been sued, never faced any consequence larger than a raised voice. He thought the worst that could happen was a difficult conversation. He thought he was in a negotiation. He was not in a negotiation. My attorney filed the criminal fraud complaint. The notary who had signed the fraudulent power of attorney was contacted by investigators within 72 hours. I will not tell you what the notary said in detail because that is still part of an ongoing matter, but I will tell you that the notary did not protect my brother. They had a conversation with investigators that lasted several hours, and at the end of it, my brother's attorney, the someone he had spoken to about his options, quietly withdrew from the case. I also hired a locksmith. The morning after the criminal complaint was filed, I went to my building's management office with my deed, my ID, and a letter from my attorney, and I had the locks changed while my brother and sister-in-law were at a meeting. They had no idea was a meeting designed specifically to get them out of the apartment for 2 hours. I had every legal right to do this. My attorney had confirmed it 6 times because I asked her 6 times. My name was on the deed. The fraudulent power of attorney had been flagged and reported. There was no legal mechanism by which they had a right to be in that apartment. I walked back in for the first time in 11 days. I would like to tell you it felt triumphant. It felt like standing in a place where something had been broken and hadn't finished breaking yet. The spare room they had been using was a mess. There were dishes in the sink I didn't recognize. A child's toys in the corner of the living room, and I want to be careful here, because my nephew was 2 years old and none of this was his fault, and I made sure before anything else happened that he was safe and that whatever came next, he would be taken care of. I had already spoken to my attorney about ensuring any proceedings protected him. He was 2 years old. He had done nothing. My grandmother's earrings were on the bathroom counter. I put them back in the velvet pouch and I put the pouch in my coat pocket, and I sat down on my own couch, and I called my mother. She already knew. Of course she already knew. She had been talking to my brother every day, and she did not say she was sorry for what he had done. She did not say she was shocked, or that she had no idea, or that she couldn't believe it. She said she thought I was being very dramatic, that families work things out, that my brother had a son and a wife and responsibilities, and that I was being selfish not to consider his situation. She said, and I am not exaggerating, these are the words she used, that it would have been the right thing to do to help them. I said, he forged my signature on a legal document. She said, I know he shouldn't have done it that way. That way. Not that he shouldn't have done it, that he shouldn't have done it that way. I told her I loved her. I told her I hoped she stayed well. I told her I would be in touch when I was ready. And then I ended the call. And I have not spoken to her since. I don't say that as a victory. I say it as a fact. Some doors close, and what's behind them isn't grief so much as relief. And that relief comes with its own complicated weight that I'm still working through. The civil case moved faster than I expected. My attorney had the fraudulent power of attorney. The email my mother had accidentally forwarded. Text message records my brother had not thought to delete. And a statement from the notary that I cannot detail but that my attorney described as more than enough. My brother arrived at the first hearing with the posture of someone who had been told by someone they trusted that there was still a deal to be made. There wasn't. His attorney stood up and began to outline an argument that I think was supposed to be about disputed family agreements and verbal understandings, and the implied nature of long-term cohabitation. My attorney put the forged document on the table, then the email, then the notary statement. The other attorney stopped talking. He looked at my brother. My brother looked at the table. The judge looked at the evidence for a long time. Then she looked at my brother. She said she wanted to be very clear about what she was looking at. She said she wanted to be clear that what was in front of her was not a family misunderstanding or a dispute about spoken agreements. She said she wanted everyone in the room to understand the difference between a civil matter and a criminal one, and that what she was looking at touched both. My brother's face did something I had never seen it do before. It just emptied, like something behind his eyes turned off. The civil judgment came quickly after that. I won't walk through every detail because most of it is legal procedure and I don't want to bore you. But the important things. The fraudulent power of attorney was formally voided. My brother and sister-in-law were ordered to vacate, which they already had by that point, and they were found liable for the legal costs I had incurred. The criminal fraud investigation is ongoing, and I am not able to speak to it further, but I will say that the notary is cooperating, and that my brother's original attorney is no longer practicing in the state of Texas. I want to tell you about my nephew, because people always ask, and because he deserves more than a footnote. He is 2 years old. He is currently living with his maternal grandparents while his parents navigate what comes next. And I have been in contact with his maternal grandmother, who is a sensible woman who had nothing to do with any of this, and who was, when I called her, furious at her daughter in a way that made me feel less alone. She told me he is happy and safe. She sends me pictures sometimes. He has no idea any of this happened, and I hope when he is old enough to know anything about it, he only knows that the adults around him handled it with his best interests in mind. I am not his enemy. I never was. Here is what I know now that I didn't know before. The version of myself that backed down, that absorbed the cost, that found a way to make it okay. That version of me was not kind. It was afraid. And I confused the two for a long time because in my family, fear and kindness looked identical. They both required the same thing, which was making yourself smaller so someone else could feel bigger. I was good at being small. I had practiced it for 3 decades. I am not good at it anymore. The apartment is still mine. I go home to it every night. And sometimes, I stand at the window, and I look at the city, and I think about the 6 years I spent building toward this specific view, this specific place, this exact feeling of having made something no one could take from me. They tried. They came very close. The only reason they failed is that they were so certain I wouldn't fight that they got careless, and careless people always leave trails. My grandmother's earrings are back in the velvet pouch. I wear them sometimes now, on days when I need to remember who I am, and where I came from, and what I am capable of. She was not a small woman. She was careful and quiet, and people underestimated her constantly. And then she was gone, and she left me everything she could fit into a velvet pouch. And the most important thing in that pouch was never the pearls. It was the lesson underneath them, the one I took too long to learn. The people who love you don't ask you to disappear, and the people who ask you to disappear were never going to love you. No matter how small you made yourself, no matter how many times you said yes, you can call the police. You can call a lawyer. You can pull your deed and read your title history, and forward that email to someone who knows what to do with it. You are allowed to fight for what you built. You are allowed to be the person in your own story who doesn't back down. I should have learned that sooner. I'm glad I learned it at all. What is the most entitled thing a family member has ever done to you? I genuinely want to know. Leave it in the comments below. And if this story hit close to home, you know what to do. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. I'll see you in the next one.